esteemed panelists who are here with us to provide some discussion, and also we'll have some roundtable answering of questions. And we'd also love for you to put questions into the chat box. And then we're going to provide you with a link that we'd like for you to test out a prototype of an app. And the part 3 will be that trial and then providing some feedback. And part 4 will be our closing remarks and a call to action associated to digital humanities. And so the team of putting together the workshop, my name is Patty Goodman, and I'm from Northeastern University, and I am calling in from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the time for me right now is midnight and 44 minutes in to Saturday. So I cannot promise you how I might be a little slap happy within a couple of hours, or I might have a yawn here or there, and it has nothing to do with you all. Just giving that disclaimer. Alice, if you want to share a little bit about yourself.
I'm Alice Mello, and I'm also a faculty at Northeastern College of Professional Studies in the Analytics and Enterprise Intelligence domain. I am also in Boston, even though I'm from Brazil. I have been here for 25 years, and I'm hoping to stay awake all the way to the end. But it's going to be a challenge without music, because knowing myself, I can only be awake at late hours if I'm dancing. So I'm trying. I had some coffee. And I'm glad to be here. I'm sad that I didn't make to India, because it's still a dream. It's still in my bucket list, and I have to get there and meet a guru. But I'm happy to be here and help facilitate the workshop tonight. Welcome all.
And Matthias, I know that you are on, we will be able to hear you if you want to share about yourself.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. I didn't know if I got muted by various hosts or anything. Hello, everyone. My name is Matthias Richard. I'm a graduate assistant director of research for the writing program in the Department of English, where I teach a variety of literature, linguistics, and history courses. But also, I conduct research for the program on innovative new pedagogies as well as teacher training. So we're always looking to find new connections, especially to the digital humanities in this time of increasing online teaching. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. It's a little bit more merciful in terms of the timing. It's only 9:45 here, but happy to be with you all, and hope to enjoy the workshop together.
Thank you. Yeah, you're just in the bud of the evening. And Claudine, how about you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Claudine Bruno. I'm a professor at the Business and Management program at Centro Universitário Senac in Brazil. I'm also from Brazil, but I'm living in California since the beginning of this year. And I have been working with sustainability in management education. So this is my area of expertise, but I have collaborating with this team in other works. And I'm really glad to be here, and I hope we all have a wonderful workshop.
Thank you. And so I just want to highlight one of the areas that I'm so thrilled about in leading this or being part of this team is that we are all coming from very different disciplines and different regions and internationally. We've been pretty much connecting virtually from the very beginning. So it's been a really great experience. And so just as norms, love that all of our participants stay muted, which I understand you kind of don't have an option, but if you can, click on the chat so that you can kind of watch the chat box, because there will be times when we're putting the link into the chat box and that we will be asking you to do some of those, use that link to do something with that. We'll also have a Google document that we're hoping that you will be adding feedback into, and we'll be sharing the Google document while people are adding to it. So that'll be a piece. And if you have questions, please add those into the chat box so that we can kind of keep up throughout our workshop. We had built in some buffers, so I think we're not going to cut anything. We should be good on our timing. We really appreciate all your patience, and please participate. And I'll hand this over to Elise.
We wanted to introduce our panelists, Dr. Terry Nurmiko-Fuller, Brian Carter, and Dr. Suman Kundu. I think Dr. Suman had a little bit of trouble there with, we might not be able to see him. So with that said, I wanted to let them, so Dr. Terry is a senior lecturer in Digital Humanities, Center for Digital Humanities Research at the Research School of Humanities and the Arts in Australian National University. Her research involves interdisciplinary experimentation into the ways digital technology and computational tools can be used to enrich and diversify scholarship in the humanities, arts, and social science. She will present a little bit to us about her research. Dr. Terry, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that's perfect. Yeah, there was a question before about where everyone is based and what the time zones are. So I am in Canberra in Australia, which is the capital city that no one has ever heard of. You know, like I Googled it before I moved here. And it for me is like 3 p.m. So perfect afternoon, leisurely morning, went for a run. I really lucked out to the time zone. So thank you, Patty. Much appreciated. Yes, so I'm a senior lecturer based in the Center for Digital Humanities Research. We sit in a research school of humanities and arts and in the College of Arts and Social Sciences. So I'm very much an interdisciplinary researcher who's surrounded predominantly by humanities, arts, and social sciences researchers. The people who I work most closely in the center include, you know, an anthropologist, an art historian. My background is in archaeology and philology, so the study of ancient languages. We've recently been joined by a computer scientist, though, and all our research agendas are very, very interdisciplinary. We're pretty international as well. I have a colleague from Brazil, since Brazil is clearly the country to be affiliated with. So we have one of them as well. I'm from Finland. My colleagues are, and our students are from Australia, New Zealand, elsewhere in Europe. And we are very proud to say that everyone in the center speaks at least 2 languages. So, you know, international and sort of multilingual. We collaborate also extensively with the GLAM sector, so galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And so the data that we end up using and working with is often either peripheral or even sometimes outside our area of expertise and knowledge. And this has kind of required us to learn a certain thoughtfulness and delicacy in approaching other people's cultural heritage, and, you know, trying to avoid those sorts of things where our enthusiasm isn't the thing that leads the research agenda, but a very thoughtful consideration on whether we should do something rather than whether we simply can. I guess I'll move on to the second slide, please. So our data is pretty diverse, but so are our methodologies as well. That, I guess, is not that surprising given how diverse we are as a group of people. But we certainly have a lot of diverse methodologies and research agendas. Some of us, namely me, really love metadata and linked data and the semantic web. I mean, that's just where all my passions lie. I share a background in web science with my colleagues, so we collaborate a lot on examining how the social and the technological together affect how the web manifests as a thing in the universe. And we can, of course, discuss how the web isn't just one thing, but, you know, for the sake of clarity and expression. Our students are very enthusiastic about machine learning, and in particular, and I don't really know why, but I strongly support it, 3D modeling, AR, VR, I think the software that gets used most by my undergraduate and master's level students is Unity. They just absolutely adore it. I thought I would include some examples of some of the projects that we've been working on recently. I encourage you all to have a look at Tag the Web and Kieran's NMA Explorer. So the NMA Explorer is made in collaboration with the National Museum of Australia. Some really interesting research outcomes from that, namely because the training data was not Australian data, it was from an American institution, which means that the tool is very good at recognizing ladies' bonnets and teapots. It thinks that the boomerang is a type of slug. So there's a nice case study example if anyone wants to use it. And from a personal perspective, please go into Skullbook and click on all of the things and download all of the models, because those are largely made by me, and then it looks better in my CV when the viewing numbers go up. So thank you. Slide 3, please. So the 3 things that I care in some ways the most about in the universe are privacy, ethics, and trust. And these things, this holy trinity of the pet, as it were, comes up in both my research and my teaching constantly. This is a space that I have to navigate in various different kinds of forms. For years and years, I was strongly against the quantified self. And then 2 years ago, I started running. And now I'm in this situation where I am a user of the quantified self in a very serious, very involved way. And I'm having to reconsider how I teach the topic to my students, because I can't just say that it's bad, but then at the same time, engage with it myself. We examine a lot of the effects of the effect of the data economy on privacy, but also try and open the students' eyes to this kind of proactive engagement with various online forums, which can be harnessed for some kind of potentially positive output, such as resisting rape culture, but also having some considerations for themselves in terms of seeing themselves as an information, not just a data producer, but an information producer. So sure, you put your photo of you and your friends on social media. I would say Twitter, but they're never on Twitter. Facebook or Snapchat or TikTok. But that data production is only half of the picture. There's a secondary consideration of what that material tells other people about you. And I'm sort of going to come back to that point later on in the discussions as well. But what we really do a lot in the CDHR is we look at this idea of humanities and technology together, like how the humanities can ensure that technology is created in such a way that it is respectful and thoughtful of privacy, ethics, and trust. And thus also we look at this co-constitution of the web as combining both technical and societal considerations. And my final slide, please. As I already outed myself, I'm a methodologist who loves metadata and linked data in particular. I describe myself sometimes when it's a more serious sort of, like when I talk to the Vice Chancellor, I will say that, well, I am, a data agnostic. I'm willing to work with just about anything and see if it works and if we can do it. And then when I'm talking to my colleagues, I describe myself as intellectually promiscuous. But so you can pick which one of those labels you'd like to apply. I was once described by a colleague as the person who doesn't care about the beautiful things, only the connections between them. And of course, the art historian would say that, but she is right. I genuinely sort of don't care about the exciting, beautiful thing at the end of my linked data knowledge graph, but I care deeply about what that graph looks like and how that represents the way that we understand the universe. And again, I'm sure all of you are aware of I don't need to sort of labor the point of the importance of trust, ethics, and privacy when you're using a methodology such as mine. So I think I'll leave it at that, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions and describe myself further. Thank you.
So, thank you. Our next panelist is Dr. Brian Carter. He's the Director of Center for Digital Humanities at the College of Humanities, Associate Professor at the African Studies at the University of Arizona. His research focused on advanced visualization and how sustained and varied digital communication affects student retention and engagement in literature courses taught both online and face-to-face. Dr. Carter is going to present about his research for us now. Go ahead.
I really appreciate being here. Thank you all for being wherever you are in whatever time zones you happen to be in. It is about 10 o'clock p.m. my time here in Arizona with Mateus, so it's not too bad. Usually I'm in bed a little bit earlier than this, but I decided to stay up for this because it's so special. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I'd like to present to you or talk to you a little bit about some of the research that I'm involved in, but also very specific uses of technology within the humanities or specific use examples of digital humanities, specifically, even more specifically, within an Africana Studies department. So, as you already know, digital humanities is not just one thing. It means a lot of things. And as technology continues to evolve, the digital humanities, that definition is going to continue to evolve. One of the things that I like to incorporate in that, one of the reasons I was brought to the University of Arizona was to forward this notion of incorporating a higher degree of culture and technology into the digital humanities in some respects. When I say culture into digital humanities, yes, we have these different cultural studies, but very rarely do we have that which is happening in Africana studies within the digital humanities. And so looking at how we can focus these efforts that we all are very interested in how we understand the African diaspora. So when I think about digital humanities, I think about, of course, research, pedagogy, and methodology, and all of that really focusing on cultural studies. And that's really what I'm going to talk with you a little bit about today. When I think about how we engage students with technology, we, of course, know that digital humanities isn't just one way. It is, of course, a two-way street, where in addition to our demonstrating and using technology for research and teaching and visualization, we also encourage our students to, of course, express their understanding of whatever they're doing using a variety of tools. We just heard about some very cool ones, and hopefully you'll be introduced to a number of other tools as you go through this particular workshop. Next slide, please. One of the things that I've been studying since my dissertation is the Harlem Renaissance, and as I thought about how I got into digital humanities, it really came about a rather roundabout way. I was first interested in African American literature, and as I got into my PhD program, I really became enamored with this era that we know as the Jazz Age, the Harlem New Negro movement. This period that was an explosion of literature, creative expression, and I see that as one of the very early ways that digital humanities, in some ways, was being expressed through the media form of the day in order to introduce the American public to a very creative side of Black life and culture. When we think about how digital Africana studies or digital humanities has been a part of Black culture for a long time, we see that through each of the periods that I tend to focus on in my academic research, that I see examples of how digital media, how analog media, how some form of mediated discussion, communication, visualization has been a part of Black culture for longer than some even realize. And then, of course, the most recent area of focus that I've been really enamored with, that I have realized has been around around just as long is, of course, Afrofuturism. So when I think about all of these areas of that make up Africana studies or parts of it, I see digital culture, digital humanities infused in each one of these areas. Next slide, please. So when I think about what we're doing here, or what this whole area is focused on, I see that all of the technologies that you're really interested in doing, whether it be data visualization, mapping, AI, etc., all of this, when focused on a particular disciplinary area like African American literature, you start to see brand new meanings. You start to understand and experience that literature very, very differently, because now you're inside of it, or now you're interacting with it, or moving it around very differently. When I look at the study of, say, African American literature and how Afrofuturism infused into African American literature, I can then understand how technology then is sort of woven into each one of these pieces. When I see a reimagining of these authors as to the place of people of African descent in a world that seems rather chaotic. So when I look at early works, by Martin Delaney, Blake or the Huts of America, a revisioning of what America would be like if things were a little bit different with regards to the whole slavery thing. The Comet by W.E.B. Du Bois. What would happen if a comet came and during the 1920s, we know what racial issues were going on in America at that time. What would happen if a comet, killed everyone, or so we thought, except a black man and a white woman? How would that whole, situation play out with regards to repopulating the earth? I won't tell you the end, but it is quite surprising. When we move on and look at even satirists like George Schuler, that writes about a machine that's created that sort of pondering the idea of what might happen if all black people would walk through a machine and come out white, and then who would the Klan terrorize, or who would civil rights organizations represent when there aren't any of these issues to talk about? So we have these reimaginings that when you then add a technological twist, it adds an entirely new meaning to everything that we're studying. Next slide, please. All right. So when I then think about Afrofuturism, I then am able to not only expand my understanding of Black culture, but then expand my understanding of how Black culture has been represented in a variety of forms, musically, as you see through a variety of these artists, and how Afrofuturism is infused in each one of the ways that these artists have represented the race and represented culture, and have blurred the lines between the past, the present, and the future. I really encourage you to look up some of these and listen to some of their work and the storylines behind their work, and the ways that they have incorporated not only pop culture, but also Afrofuturism in their ideology. Next slide, please. And so when I then think about the very new tools that we have to experience not only literature, but also culture, we can then imagine that often we see underrepresented groups, kind of waiting until the various technologies have become mainstream, and then hopping onto the bandwagon, often too late to really take advantage, able to really press forward the opportunities when you're out there in front of everyone, looking at how you can express your understanding of your culture, but also demonstrate what the culture means through these different tools. I know that many of you have worked with AR and VR, but some of the ways that the learning curve has come down dramatically with regards to introducing our students to these kinds of tools, but then focusing them on culture. Oh my gosh, when you're looking at easy to use tools like Vuforia, our previous presenter talked about how her students loved Unity. Well, Vuforia works perfectly with that when you're thinking about about using AR and ZapWorks and AR, but also when you think about the way that VR has evolved into relatively easy, user-friendly ways to immerse yourself in an environment, but also relatively I guess higher learning curved ways where you're creating that through computer modeling programs. So the ways that we can tell our stories, the ways that we can incorporate the devices that we carry with us all the time that are enabling these brand new platforms for us to communicate with one another, for us to project our presence to another location with through our phones. Quite amazing. I can't wait to share some of these applications with you, and I hope you get a chance to experience some of them through your workshop. Okay, I think that's my last slide. Thank you very much.
Now moving on to our next panelist, Dr. Suman Kundu is an assistant professor at the Department of Computer Science and Engineer at the Indian Institute of Technology of Jaipur. His research interests include social network analysis, network data science, soft computing, crowdsourcing, fuzzy and rough stat, granular computing, and multilingual text analysis. He will now present a little bit of his research to us. All yours, Dr. Kundu.
Good morning, all of you, and thank you for inviting me to this workshop. I'm very happy to meet all of you. Basically, now go back to that slide. Before going to this particular research work, I just wanted to say that this beautiful picture is from my university, IIT Jodhpur, the iconic clock tower of our library building. And to introduce that, we have also a digital humanities group, and I joined recently to this group. And my research is mostly, I am a computer scientist, and so far I work mostly with the computer science and mostly technological part. But recently I tried to explore different things on these digital humanities, or rather humanities applications, how I can apply my skills in computer science to this particular field of studies. So this work is basically in that direction. I want to come up with a cyberbully detection from multilingual Indian tweets. So next slide, please. So what is the issue with this cyberbully? So this particular workshop is talking about what actually happens when we have mobiles in our hand, and sometimes multiple mobiles in our hand. So with the increase of that mobile phones and cheap available of internet and other things, we start living in a virtual society and virtual world rather than having like a chit chat in front of a tea stall or in front of like a restaurant. We just prefer to stay in virtual world. And with this, it increases a lot of kinds of use in mobile social network, and so did the harassment over the digital world. Now, India's story. So during the introduction, we talked about that there are many people here in the panel who knows more than one language. And the true scenario of India is like more than 50% of Indians know at least 3 languages. So, and during their communication with mobile phones or any social media, they mix those languages. That's a very challenging scenario, and that diversity we need to address and to analyze anything, any sociological problems when we try to address in the context of India. So we have many languages, then many scripts. It's not only follow like Roman script. You also have each language have its own script in India, and you can imagine that there are more than 100 languages alive, and it's like more than thousands of dialects in India, and how diverse that culture in terms of language and in terms of text you will find from the web. Next slide, please. So here we try to ask this very basic question of humanities, that can we detect aggressive text from Twitter? So if someone is using Twitter, how to detect that kinds of aggressiveness and what actually harming someone emotionally or psychologically, someone is feeling bad of that language. Then this tweet, once we identify that tweet, can we identify that whether this is a one-of-a-kind tweet or that particular fellow have a nature that he or she is continuously using aggressive tweets against all his fellow web users. So with this question, we try to figure out that in the Indian context. So we have kinds of different languages. So we picked up 3 languages, and there is one jargon is called English. That is while we are mixing English and Hindi language together in a post. So then we use machine learning techniques to detect the languages from the text, and then language-specific aggression detector model using some kinds of machine learning techniques. We specifically use LSTM here. And then once we have that aggression detected, then we try to figure out whether that aggressive post coming from a user have what is the characteristics of that particular person, and what are the characteristics of that their targets. Next slide, please. So this is how we analyze that thing. So once we have that aggressive tweets identified, then we try to figure out the properties. How many followers this particular person have, how many following they have, how many friends they have, how much tweets they are doing in a day, kinds of analysis, and we put different thresholds to check whether we consider that more than 60% as a bully, or more than 50% as a bully, or more than 70% as a bully. And interesting things we are finding that they have kinds of characteristics like about 500 friends and 500 followers, not more than that kind of characteristics we are finding. Next slide, please. And finally, we are trying to figure out that this aggression, means target of this aggression is how their characteristics are showing. And here we can find that they have about 4,500 followers in many cases. Many cases they have higher followers, many cases they have higher number of tweets per day. However, one very interesting thing we found that they also are very aggressive in terms. So right now we are asking this is like a very beginning of this particular study, but we are now asking a question whether aggressiveness is a propagating or it has a diffusion characteristics in the network or not. So we are trying to analyze that, whether aggression is also having a diffusion characteristics, and which actually will be a very nice thing to study. So that's where I stop here. And this is one of the research I am doing on the digital humanities. I am open to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
So we have a couple of questions, but thank you for our panelists now. And I would just, so the first question is mainly to Dr. Terry and Dr. Brian. While big data encompasses all sort of data types, including multimedia data, how is the available multimedia data being handled in the mobile context?
Would you like to take that first? I'll jump in after you.
Sure, that's great. I like that. Then there's like a guaranteed improvement in the quality of the.
Oh, no. I doubt that, believe me. Not this late at night.
So I guess I found this quite a sort of it was a very interesting question, which I found sort of that I could have approached from a couple of different perspectives in a way. And the way I sort of chose to approach this, quite a broad question, is to kind of think about how different social media platforms have very different kinds of characteristics, based quite a lot with things like, you know, the kind of data that they're populated with, you know, like the sort of thing that gets posted on them. So we could say, like, of course, these are generalizations, but maybe Twitter is more text heavy. Obviously, Instagram is, you know, dominated by images. TikTok is all video, or so I'm led to believe, because I'm actually not on TikTok, but I follow people on Twitter who share. And I think that's one big consideration. Like, you could, to meet the sort of criteria of big data, if it's from the perspective of, say, the size of your data set, if everything is in text or everything is in multimedia, then I think that's a practical consideration that comes in. And then the second consideration is that these different platforms, for a number of very sort of, I think, different reasons, end up attracting very different types of demographics. So, I mean, I keep saying Twitter because that's my, you know, that's my platform of choice, as it were. But I know that virtually none of my students are on it. I mean, that's like a 20-year age difference, and that's already means that we don't overlap with each other at all, which is great because I get to tweet about whatever I want and my students don't see it, but also my students don't see my brilliance. But anyway. Thank you for laughing. It would have been terrible if you had not. So hold on, let me just check my notes. So we also do a lot of research on platforms which are not necessarily ones that we use ourselves, like Sina Weibo is one of the ones that my PhD student harvests data off. But she's able to do that because she can read Chinese, right? But I have a personal barrier which stops me from engaging with that platform. So I think that also affects the way that I think that's a really specific consideration, which is perhaps more in that space of the multilingual data analysis. And so I think that when you look at the ways we approach this big social media data, using, say, data analytics or entity recognition or natural language processing, etc., the challenges themselves are kind of determined by the platform. And I think that it can be, it sort of flirts a little with this slightly reductionist attitude, in terms of assuming that there could possibly even be one single technological solution that would be, you know, equally applicable to all the different platforms themselves. And so maybe from a sort of data access perspective, you know, some platforms do provide APIs. Twitter does, Instagram doesn't. And so, you know, I think that can affect the data harvesting and the data collection part of any research workflow, basically. And so I think those are very kind of sort of practical, to me, those are like really practical considerations, like what data is there and what the challenges that those platforms present on us. But then there is that whole different side to it, which is I feel compelled to talk about, which is that if you look at something like getting ethics clearance, at least at the Australian National University where I'm based at, the ethics clearance for research and data harvesting is granted on a case-by-case basis for each specific proposal that goes in. And so Twitter is seen as a public forum, so getting ethics clearance to working with this data is, I'm going to say, trivially easy, although now I've, of course, have jinxed myself for ethics clearance for all of eternity. But trying to get clearance for harvesting data from somewhere like Facebook is virtually impossible because it's a much more, it's seen as a private thing because you have to log in as a person. It's not the equivalent of standing on a soapbox in the corner of Hyde Park and shouting about how the end is nigh. Although, I mean, anyway, I will get to my final point, which is that I think that one crucial aspect when we look at this idea of multimedia data, and obviously that's implied in the question's terminology of big data, is the sheer volume of the data being produced all the time and the speed at which it's being generated. But I think that there's another issue, which is that the people who are producing this data, and they are doing so relentlessly and continuously, so we can only ever really capture, in some ways like a snapshot in time. I think longitudinal studies can be really, really challenging, and we face barriers where there's just not enough sort of computational heavy lifting available to us to do something like, harvest the Instagram of 1 million people or something like that. But I think there's also this consideration that even if the users recognize that they are giving something away of themselves by sharing their content, we kind of have to be really careful that we're not inadvertently collecting information about them which they didn't want to share just because they weren't thinking it through. So I'm sort of thinking about, trying to think of a sort of example that would illustrate my point, which would be things like everybody sharing a photo of their dinner, and then we can sort of collect that and say, hey, these are the culinary preferences of people who live, in Australia. But if those dishes are somehow indicative of something like, it's halal or it's kosher, then there are cultural and religious aspects that are then being harvested about that user, which, unfortunately, we happen to live in a world where those kinds of things could even be used for nefarious purposes by somebody else.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so let's go ahead and if you want to follow up with your thoughts, Brian.
Well, very briefly, the only thing that I would add to that was a great answer. The only thing I would add to that is that the type of data that my students are producing is evolving. It's becoming more complex, and it's becoming huge. And so as a result of the size of the data, when you think about things like 360 video or volumetric video or anything that the students have very little option as to where it can be stored, those are the kinds of discussions that we're now starting to have, whereas just a few years ago you didn't have to have a discussion as to where a 3 gig file is going to be stored that's going to stream down to your mobile device, and that's the only option you have if you want to take advantage of some of the newer technologies that are generating these huge data files, whatever that data may happen to be. So where it's being stored is becoming a very real conversation for us. Who owns or who has control of that storage is also becoming a huge concern. When I saw Facebook's new headset, Oculus, that just came out, the first thing that came over was a cloud, with regards to VR, because, I just saw that as being a stifling and an eventual harvesting of so many people's data, because they're going to be attracted to a $299 price tag and not realize, everything that is, as you mentioned, being given away. But when I also think about the larger files that are being produced using other platforms, that's where I just can't wait until we can begin democratizing that conversation and that data storage and that data streaming, because right now, just like most media companies, there are only a few that can handle those types of data sets.
Thank you. That was really helpful, and it was a complicated question, so I appreciate the complexity that you provided, Terry, and also the ideas of this, how do you even store it, let alone how do you figure out all the intricacies of the potential cultural values that are coming through. Thank you both. Elise?
Yes, thank you. So this question goes to Dr. Kundo and also to Dr. Terry. What are the implications of deploying multimedia data analytics tools on mobile phones in order to advance decision-making and yet maintaining individual privacy? Dr. Suman, maybe you wanted to start that? I don't know.
Yeah. So it's a very very tricky things. We are coming into an age of mobile phones, and everyone wants to have this assistant, this Alexa or Siri or Cortana. So all these assistants, we want to talk to them, and now that is basically processed in a central location. It's really threat to the privacy, and this is the biggest concerns about right now. So all this ML and AI, machine learning and AI algorithms, they run in the centralized location. So all the data what you pass through will pass to that centralized location. However, the hope coming from computer science research is like this, that there is a new concept called federated learning. And that federated learning talks about a very lightweight learning tools that will reside inside the mobile phone itself. And then it will learn the model there and pass on the learned parameters only to the central location to have a orchestration over all those other phones. So it become a decentralized distributed learning mechanism. I hope this technology will mature in coming days, and once it's matured, then this privacy can be ensured while making the use of big data analytics in a phone and the small devices. It's not only about the phone. It's about the gadgets we are wearing right now. It can scan your say blood pressure, then your pulse rate, then whether you are in a different mood or scenario. So these kinds of technology will develop further to even analysis your emotions and all other things. I think those are the future gadgets that will come in, and then privacy will be the most vulnerable thing. And so computer scientists already started working on these kinds of distributed learning. We also have a very small research started in this federated learning technology, how that can be even give the simple general users a facility so that they can just export that in a public cloud with a very cost-effective manner with this federated learning kinds of applications.
Thank you. Terry, how about you?
So yeah, so I think this fell very much into the space of whether we, should do something just because we can. My main answer though would be that in terms of any kind of data analytics or kind of user data work, always kind of carries with it these ethical and moral challenges. And from my perspective, it's kind of hard to convince me, this is like my personal bias, it's really hard to convince me that that the positive possibilities or implications of any kind of analysis or software development that puts an individual user's privacy at risk is a positive thing. Like for me, that there's a lot of potential for negative outcome, and it's a hard job to convince me otherwise. And I think there are two considerations. So I see the way I use my mobile phone is constant and relentless, right? Like it's the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning. If my battery is low, I'll just go home. It's, it's what's like, I don't know what it's the equivalent of it being ubiquitous when it's just one person, but it's like, I have it right here just in case. And of course, things like the numbers of apps and the kinds of apps that you use and the way that you engage with them. Like to me, the mobile phone is a cognitive extension. I know a fraction of things, but I know that they exist and I can go and retrieve that information from elsewhere. And the way that my phone is set up, anyone's phone is set up, can very easily be used to produce a sort of like a digital fingerprint that I think makes the complete anonymization of the data and the equipment almost impossible. And I hate saying these that it's impossible, because you know what I mean. It makes it very, very challenging. And like, I feel like we all learned a lot of lessons from the challenges that Facebook encountered in terms of profiling users. You know, like almost the privacy of an individual doesn't matter so much, because even if they know a bit about you, they know enough to extrapolate the future behavior of other people based on that. And that's why it's kind of scary and dangerous to me. And if you think about the digital fingerprint from the apps, but then also add to that some kind of data analytics of, say, a content, then I am kind of scared that these things that crouch on my privacy could quite easily now be used to determine things about me, like my gender, my age, where I live, where I work, because I have a really boring life, right? Like I just leave my house, I go to work, I go to the gym, I go back to work, and then I go home again. Like my day is easy to map. And I think that when my privacy, if and when it's compromised, that's the kind of information that actually potentially leaves me vulnerable to attack. And not just me, but anyone who meets these kinds of characteristics. And that's why I think that the decision-making things, decision-making algorithms, and the choice to use live and you know, sort of dynamic data produced by things like mobile phones, which you carry with you all the time and can be used to track you in real world, have to be approached really, really carefully, because even if you don't have nefarious aims, or even if you're not a terrible person, once it exists, there's always reuse potential.
It's scary, isn't it? When you're in your car going to yoga and then you get a message, oh, there is traffic to get to your students. Like, how do you know that? I didn't tell you where I was going.
Yeah, there's a couple of really fun case study examples about, there's a, not naming any names, there's a university where they tracked which students enjoyed the company of which other students in the accommodation. I'm going to just leave it at that. You can put that into your Google history, not mine.
All right, our next question.
That's part of the debate, right? Is the health issues. But yes, go ahead, Elisa.
Thank you. So, Dr. Carter, how might real-time system generate trustworthy feedback, supporting integrity within the multimedia content? I'm starting to fade.
Yes, well, this can be approached in so many different ways, and we all have different perspectives as to not only how we define real-time systems, but also the type of feedback that we're expecting to get back from those real-time systems. From my perspective, the real-time feedback or the things that affect my understanding of this would be latency, making sure that there are as few of those delays as possible. Resolution and immediacy. So when I'm thinking about whether I'm giving real-time feedback to students, or if students are receiving real-time feedback in some way, shape, or form from the data that's being generated from the multimedia that they are creating, we have to realize that these new systems have to address all of those in order to minimize distraction and in order to realize positive results. If any of these are lacking, you're going to get negative outcomes in many respects, because the experience won't really be quite as what the resolution that you were hoping.
Thank you.
Point, and I was also thinking when you were mentioning that, as Suman had mentioned, on the number of languages, even within India itself, or the dialects. So not only is it the feedback that you're getting, but are you getting it in the language that you would be expecting, and are you comprehending it the way that you want? So again, this is another level of complexity that has kind of just a lot of layers in there. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, Lisa.
Oh, no. Our last question for now is for Dr. Kundu. What are the data structure solutions? Oh my goodness. What are the data structure solutions to combine multimedia with other type of big data when developing and deploying analytic tools on mobile device? I like that question.
So the major thing with big data is that it has all the types of data. So it has structured data, unstructured data, and semi-structured data. So multimedia data is mostly unstructured data, but the good thing is that it comes with a metadata, which is kind of semi-structured data. Okay, so now we have to have, when we are trying to combine different data types in our analytics or in our machine learning algorithms, we need to have the data fusion technology. So data fusion is a very technique where you transfer one types of data into another types of data and make it a common platform. So here, basically, these semi-structured data types or data structures are very important to combine these things like JSON or XML data types. And then there is a data type called blob, binary large object. So that is also available in a different cloud spaces where you can store your multimedia data in the form of binary data stream. So so that could be another option as a data structure to use in combination with different other semi-structured data types like XML or JSON. So you can use also blob data structure. Now, in terms of databases, we have NoSQL database where you can have these kinds of different semi-structured data can be used, can be indexed, and that you can write also some kinds of query that is not SQL query, but like SQL query. And then another thing that is available is last point, maybe I want to add that this function as a service that is available from these clouds, that service is basically called serverless. So you don't have to have a server, but you can deploy your asynchronous discrete functions, and that those functions can communicate with each other to come up with a very nice analytics on top of your data. So these are some of the data types that can be used in combinations with multimedia as well as other kinds of structured data types.
Thank you. I mean, we have covered a lot. I mean, this is very complex one here that would take hours, a whole other workshop just to tackle it. All right. So we have a time for open questions. Do we have time for open questions to our panelists?
Well, so if there was one or two questions for our panelists, if anyone wants to either put it into chat or if you are interested in speaking it out, and then we're going to move into part 2, which is testing out one of these digital humanities apps that's collecting some data. These good questions about issues of privacy and ethics and the storage and all this good stuff. I'm not seeing anything, so I am going to move us into part 2. So Matthias,
yeah, if anyone has a question, just to put in your chat, then we can address it at some point.
Okay, are we moving on then?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay then. Hello again, everyone. That was an amazing panel session. I have to say I learned a lot. And we are happy to make our own contribution, I think, to this series of conversations about applications for gathering big multimedia data. We're to kick that off, we're going to talk a little bit about Headliner, an app that's been kind of collaboratively developed for this team over the last year or so. It's essentially the reason it's called Share, Don't Share is because it is kind of a prototype of a new media sharing application designed to capture the sharing habits of discrete cultural communities self-defined by their common beliefs. And this has a theoretical background that I don't want to get too deeply into, but it does draw upon kind of cultural studies even as far back as, say, the Frankfurt School, thinking about how sectors of the culture industry might manufacture or make resilient or recognizable, at least, cultural communities through cultural media and social media narratives that are given to them or circulated and consumed by them. But especially since, later kind of cultural studies critics such as Stuart Hall and others who've thought that there are trends, right, in the ways that we as communities choose to share or circulate certain narratives, social narratives between each other based upon our ideologies and based upon our beliefs and our values. And so this app is meant to kind of capture some of those decision-making habits and the kind of cultural awareness and resiliency that might be resultant of that. I know that Patty is going to probably send you the link to this Spark on this Adobe Spark on the app itself, which includes a bit more information in terms of writing about it and also screenshots to help walk you through how it works. But essentially what we're doing is gathering first demographic data from those who download the app, what ethno-linguistic kind of cluster of the world they're from, whether they're from kind of the Anglophone cluster or the Francophone cluster, the Eastern European cluster, and what have you. And then asking them to essentially kind of dictate, or to us at least, what beliefs are commonly held among the culture or the community that they identify with. And this is related to what we think we might find when we look into the participants' sharing habits, because I think the importance of this, as Patty's hitting on here on the Spark, is that social media itself has this massive impact on the community's resilience, or at least on the ideology that kind of glues that community together or not, right? And a lot of that news can, of course, be fake, as we've seen with the kind of rise in misinformation that's circulated through information communication technologies. And, that's only made more so relevant by the coronavirus, as you can see there. Plenty of misinformation gets spread. In fact, as I saw in a recent interview regarding misinformation in the coronavirus, lies about the coronavirus have spread across social media about 5 times faster than any kind of true news. So simply because it might conform to a certain subculture or community's belief system, right? And so after you kind of elaborate on your digital filter, as it were, the belief system that you believe your group holds, things around individualism versus collectivism, and your beliefs about certain kinds of civil liberties and things like that. You get to go into an app where it's essentially a swipe right, swipe left system where you decide whether you're going to share or not share news media that's sourced, social media narratives that are sourced from your ethno-linguistic cluster. So it's going to be regionally relevant to you and linguistically relevant to you in some way. And once you have essentially decided whether or not to share, you get to go through a second round wherein, you can see here the headlines that would be provided to you, right? And perhaps a caption, just like you might find on social media. And then in round 2, there's an additional layer of symbolism added, another layer of potential meaning, because you have images attached to those media narratives, which may or may not change your decision-making habits. And we are attempting to track whether or not the sharing habit matches or conforms with your belief system that you've expressed in the prior questions, and then whether or not you could recognize that it is fake, right? Despite the fact that you shared it, to kind of determine not only the accuracy at which we can recognize news, or whether or not it conforms to your cultural beliefs, but whether the the accuracy of it makes any difference, right? For the resiliency of that ethno-linguistic community that you've identified with. And so, this leads to these kinds of research questions that we might be able to answer through this. Are value judgments attributed to the determination of whether the content is fake or not? If it is fake, would it still be shared with their social media community? Is there recognition of the potential negative impact as an outcome to the community, right? Because could this cause new polarizations within a community if they begin to believe radically different things, or if they share different things that may or may not conform with the belief system that they thought they had in common, right? And then you can, of course, see some screenshots here, and I welcome you to go to the link that is now uploaded in the chat.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. You did a great job. So what we'd love for you to do is individually, if you could click on that link and kind of get a sense of what the prototype app would be like. And then the next step is we're really looking for your feedback. So you want to share a little bit about that, and I'll click over to the Google Doc and we'll put that Google Doc into.
Yes, thank you.
The link there too.
Essentially, what we've created here is a Google Doc that you are welcome to add and edit to. I've ensured that when I made the link that anyone could edit it. And you can all do that simultaneously, I believe, if we have the bandwidth for it. But essentially, we're asking you a variety of questions and request that you perhaps fill in some of the blanks. Here's an example question. What kinds of perspectives or analysis does this app offer in terms of perhaps the political realm, exploring different perspectives, perhaps even the predictability of party affiliation. You could perhaps even look for the predictability of revolutions or reactionary politics. And then also culture itself. Do you see cultures coming together, perhaps conforming to certain beliefs, or perhaps splitting, as I kind of mentioned earlier? And then also perhaps in the business world or in the educational world, what kinds of analysis might you be able to do with this data or with the app itself? Of course, in the context of education, there might be pedagogical implications. And they've now added the Google Doc link to the chat bar as well for everyone there. Just pick a spot in the table. Hopefully, you'll see everyone else's cursors so that you're not kind of double typing with someone else into a single window of the table. But they will each kind of correspond to one of those questions, like the example there. And we ask you, what potential problems might you see with this? What potential applications might you see? What realms might you see the analysis being relevant? And what are perhaps some related apps that you can think of? And what questions do you think that that you might want to ask about this? Just you can write into any one of those in any order. And we would appreciate hearing your feedback after you take a look at those screenshots more closely.
Thank you. And so our time in terms of, we're hoping to actually spend a little bit of time so that you can go through the presentation and you can add in points here. We really are looking for your thoughts and your feedback. It really is important to hear your voice. We don't need any names, so don't worry about that. If you'd like for us to follow up with you, feel free to put your email in and we'd be happy to do that. So it's about, we had identified about 30 minutes, hoping that you would have time to kind of step through that Spark and then also put in some information here. I don't want to lose any of you, but we're hoping that you'll participate in this activity. I love seeing things are happening here in the boxes. I'm trying to figure out between Eastern Standard Time, Pacific Time, and India Time. Let's see.
We'll also answer any additional questions you might have in the chat bar or that you may write into the Google Doc as well. I'll keep an eye on that.
So there is a question in the chat for the panelists. So I don't know if the panelists, if someone might be available. The question is, why on social media fake news go viral more than 6-time real news? So if I can elaborate the question, I'm thinking that you're asking, why is it that fake news within social media can become viral and get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of hits in a short period of time, whereas a real newscast that might be shown at like a 6 p.m. time, kind of an evening evening news may not have that impact?
I think that's like $1 million question, right? Like the question really there is, what makes something go viral, right? Like, and if we knew that, well, I mean, I'd obviously still be an academic. I'd just be like a billionaire academic. But, I think that's a really, really complicated question. I think that's something that someone should do a PhD on, really systematically examine it, evaluate it. But I think one of the things that slightly cynically perhaps is that like fake news is designed to be attractive and trigger a reaction, like not attractive as positive attractive, but something that grabs your attention, makes you notice, makes you react either like very strongly, either positively or negatively. It's not hindered by the need to make sense or be factually accurate. It's never boring. It's never complicated. It's always an easy, delicious answer. And, I also often think that a kind of, there's a certain kind of rhetoric that's very attractive to us, which is often a bit negative. I mean, historically, we have seen that narratives that don't necessarily present a lot of data and objectively evaluate it, but just shout out that group of people is to blame or that group of people is to blame. Like historically, those have been very powerful tools politically. That's mine, 2 cents.
Could also that question speak for how easy it is and how in the hands of everyone the digital media is? So you can post it anything anywhere, while in not digital you have to go through the official channels of communication, that is journalism and newspapers or radio. So you don't have access to those medium if you're not a journalist, if you're not a radiolist, that kind of thing. I mean, so because there is a huge base of people and everyone can just write it and post, it's so much easier to generate fake news. Does that make sense to me or to everyone? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I believe there's both a structural component to it, like a sociological component that we've been touching on. Like it just happens to be more attractive for maybe political reasons, maybe for ideological reasons, and a lot of times people who tend to spread fake news will exist in these very tight networks where they may know each other and be able to spread it very quickly. Maybe it reaches the same people very quickly, right? And maybe it's not reaching different people. Maybe those networks are fairly closed, but there might be a lot of them who know each other or just share with the people they know will agree with them, right? So I think there's a bit of closure going on in the networks that causes these kind of echo chambers to form. And then part of it could potentially be not just structural, but actually like intentionally malicious, like perhaps the propagation of bots and things like that can literally churn out fake news through just data algorithms mashing together headlines faster than, like you said, faster than any journalist with journalistic standards could. So there's also that intentional production of misinformation as well as these kind of structural closing off of networks into their own echo chambers.
The siloing effect is definitely an issue, and it's interesting. Actually, Suman, when you had mentioned all the different languages that are within India itself, and I know China has a similar situation, different language, different script, different dialects, and how that within itself can be a barrier in allowing more information to potentially come in. That's similar to having different social medias. So the earlier keynote today, Dep Gooch, I'm sure that I'm not pronouncing his name correctly, but he was talking about Share Chat, which is used within India, and it provides different languages for information that can be shared. And that was a really fascinating idea of, here's another social media platform, and it's based off of information, and the AI is helping to use it so that information can be shared across different languages. I still wonder how cultural understanding might be impacted, because even if you have a word that you translate correctly, that does not always translate the intention or the value associated. So I can see where there still could be challenges. I love how people are filling in. So thank you for adding in feedback on the Google Doc. One thought that comes to mind is, how do we define a truth? Because what might be truth or reality to me is not necessarily a truth for someone else. It could be fake to somebody else.
Meaning making, huh?
Yeah. So how does that potentially impact the idea of fake news? If someone might not see it as fake news, how do we bring in the ethics on that piece?
Yeah, could we say that it's very attached to values too? Personal moral values?
I mean, I love that question of how do you define truth, because hilarious. How long have we got? But also, like, we know there are issues that are contested. So if you look at things like the Wikipedia entry for the Gaza Strip, right? There's been an editing war going on over the page for as long as anyone can remember, since like the birth of Wikipedia. But even issues like the composer Johann Sebastian Bach, he is not, to my knowledge, described as a composer in Wikipedia, because there at least at one point was an editorial war going on about whether he was in fact classifiable as such. Like, people will latch on to something to disagree with each other, and who then gets to be the ultimate authority in those questions of, well, my truth is not your truth, you must therefore be wrong. And that's the whole echo chamber problem, right? Like, when you only talk to people who agree with your truth and so forth. I guess the comic so I show my students a lot of comics, right? Because, of course I do. And one of the things I get them to talk about is that one that has the two dudes standing on the street, and they're looking at two numbers drawn on the pavement, or like a number drawn on the pavement, and one of them says it's a 6 and the other one says it's a 9, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not like, it's a matter of perspective, of course, like which way you're looking at the number. But a lot of my students end up concluding or sort of coming up with this idea that the greater context around the topic is what kind of lets you make the decision on whether it's a 6 or a 9. So, but then that, of course, makes the problem space much more complicated again.
Yeah, and we actually have a comment that came in saying truth is based on facts. And that's a great comment. And I one of the areas when I'm teaching or really encouraging the research and projects that we're working on is the importance of pulling data and how often data can be misused to represent a fact, to represent a truth. And so even when we think that we might have a fact, we have the data, we also need to kind of go backwards and review how the analysis was done and what does that data actually tell us? Where is the data coming from? And is there integrity in the process, the methodology in which the analysis was provided? So it's tricky. I think that's so tricky. Yeah, so the concept of your truth may not be my truth is definitely a challenging one on how we work from a not only diverse perspective or worldview, but even when we're really trying to understand what are the facts.
I think that's why it's probably important to distinguish between truth and facts. It seems like we had mentioned beliefs and motives. It seems like the truth is really the facts through your belief filter, right? In accordance with whatever your beliefs might be. And so it seems like the only way to determine what the facts are then between two people who disagree on the truth would be to just kind of reverse engineer what material facts can they agree on, like as some sort of base point before then like trying to reverse engineer what the truth is.
Would the fact validate the truth? Right?
Yeah,
exactly. The only way to validate the truth is through the fact.
Yeah, so you almost have to go backwards
and
be like, so what facts can we agree on? Like, was it raining outside? Is it nighttime? You know, you have to go backwards so far before you can begin moving towards
and this comes back to context, right? Because it's Friday. Well, technically, no, it's early Saturday. When we started, for me, it was Friday. For many of you, it was already Saturday, right? So,
but also things like it's nighttime outside. I mean, I feel compelled to point out that if Zoom has taught us anything, and lockdown, is that time is a social construct, right?
Yeah.
And so while it might be dark outside, that the only reason why that is significant is how we behave as social animals in the context of that knowledge that it's dark outside. But when it's not, like, it's dark for you at a time when it isn't dark for me on a universal timeline. That's one consideration. Second might be that in the nighttime, I engage in different sort of behaviors than you do. And so the implications of its nighttime is different. There you go. It's incredibly complicated, I think. Truth is the ultimate research question.
We have a good example in this country, don't we? Not to name it, but.
Yeah. So here's another question is how young people use the app to help help the spreading of fake news. And it's an interesting perspective of looking at the generational base. Are there more young people, and I honestly don't know, I'm just posing this, are there more young people spreading information because of their interest in it, because they think that others are going to like it, and so they increase their followers or connections? Is that a young person generational? Is that someone who might be in a kind of seeking to be joining a different kind of group? Probably not elders. I don't know at what point kind of you have the breakdown of who's using mobile media in order to share information, but the AARP in the United States is definitely big on trying to share as much information as possible for the elders.
I mean, in my own experience, I did test out the beta version of the app with students in January before the stay-at-home order and the quarantine lockdown and things like that. And what you find is with students who we looked at the analysis, the breakdown of their results in class as a pedagogical activity as opposed to just merely data gathering from them. And we paired that with a fake news literacy lesson in the writing program as a pilot for first year composition among freshmen in the undergraduate program. And what we found is that when it comes to people with generally liberal or democratic type beliefs, at least among the youth, you'll see a fairly cautious kind of sharing habit, and with people who tend to wear the red hats or the Trump stickers on the laptops. When I looked at their responses, because I asked them to do a writing response activity afterwards as well, kind of a reflection on what they learned from the app, from their sharing, reflecting on their sharing habits, is there's a lot of frustration, almost the decision to share something fake or something that goes against what they say they believe in. Like perhaps they say they believe in the freedom of religion, but they don't want Muslims to come to the United States. Right, which is kind of it's a cognitive dissonance with the belief that they've stated, but they'll reason in their response that it's simply because they don't feel represented in the mainstream media sphere. So it's almost as if they will choose to share more and more extreme content, such as I don't know what the most recent thing is that QAnon has been saying. I think like Tom Hanks is a pedophile who got Greek citizenship so that he could continue being a pedophile because it's considered a disability in Greece, or something along those lines, which is not true. But the choice to
So don't spread that.
which is not true. But that is just the most recent crazy one most extreme one I've heard. The choice to go more and more extreme with the sharing habits tends to be almost reactionary to the fact of feeling that the spin on mainstream media is so liberal, if that makes sense, or so leftist, or whatever you want to call it.
Well, and this is an issue with social media, is it's a way to target areas, as what several of our panelists had talked about in regards to past situations, basically using propaganda. But now this idea of propaganda can be even at a broader spread because of the big media options.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, whoever. I see what you were questioning, how young people use the app might stop the spread, trying to get them to understand stopping the spread of fake news. And I think one of the questions in this app, as we were developing it, the team of us that were kind of really putting the content in, and what was the purpose behind having this app looking at digital humanities, is seeing if it could be a learning tool to help people that would use it to potentially become aware. So I guess that's one question that I would love to hear anyone to kind of share their thoughts on. Do you think that doing a game on an app might prompt you to gain some awareness from an unconscious bias or an implicit script that you had not realized that you had been kind of building? Or has anyone seen anything like that that might be able to change a behavior?
probably not impossible, but I guess you'd have to have something very highly AI in an app like that, because as I see it helping to change behaviors, so sort of a play, it will very much depend on the questions that you're prompting, and the questions depend on the context. So I have a hard time to see how you could have a game that would be generic enough that the questions would be meaningful enough to help the youth, to be thinking and go deeper into those bias, into those questions. Maybe the AI, it's advanced enough that it could be getting the cues by the response, generating a question and having a response and getting a cue and having a smart question that would really help the youth, the kids, to go a little deeper. Otherwise, I almost see like sort of having to have a person in there to ask the right questions at the right time. But I guess at some point, I think AI is advancing, so there might be already a way to do it.
Well, and that's a great, one of the pieces that in developing this, we were hoping is that in the beginning, people will identify their cultural area and then potentially values. And once we get their area and values, we would be pulling headlines from their specific news areas. And initially, the headline would just be the written description for the first part of the game. The second part of the game would include the visual. So part of what we were looking at is, are they more likely to swipe it if there's a visual, or are they less likely to swipe it? Does that play in this idea of whether they're going to share it in social media? And then kind of at the end, they're having to then really determine, I've already swiped these two. Now that I look at it, do I think it's fake or not? And how might it connect to the values that in the beginning I said are related to my area of origin, however I'm defining my culture. We all have many different layers of cultures, right? So however they're kind of seeing themselves.
I mean, my research thesis was around role playing. So I had an app that I created with some peers, students, that was like a virtual forum. So you have your story, your creative story, you created that digital play, and then you posted, published, so that others would just watch it and stop the play in different points to role playing and give a different solution. So it was always like some sort of issue, problem, and that others could change the whole thing, change the whole action, or sometimes even change the whole story. But in any point, it would be like that discussion by role playing. And the idea was that it would help whoever put the play up there to be thinking about a situation and have others engage in that conversation to role playing. But at the time that I was doing that, the digital technology was still not that advanced. So publishing something like that was heavy streaming. So nowadays it would be super easy to create that kind of app and application. But
yeah, no, and that's an interesting one too, because again, in that role play concept, you would be able to get different perspectives. Claudine, were you about to? I didn't want to cut you off.
Yes, I was thinking that maybe the tool or the game in itself, it's a great way to create more engagement. But in terms of awareness, I would say that we need to when we go to the learning theories and transformative learning theories and critical reflection, one important thing is the reflections that tool creates, or how we reflect about the use of that tools. So not the tools in itself, but if it is used as a pedagogical tool in class, I believe that the way that the professor or the instructor would deal or would use this tool, I think that can help students to go to like a loop of reflection and thinking back not only on their response, but why they are responding on that way.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the pieces, this feedback concept of getting someone to really question, why did I make the decision I made?
Yeah.
Because this is the challenge, is that, we do a lot because we're in this fast pace, get information out because there's so much information that we're processing. When do we pause and think about what we just did? And I think that's where potentially this, I'm hoping, obviously, this type or other apps or tools that people are creating might be able to impact those perspectives or get them to question assumptions that could lead to some variation in their behavior if they're gathering more information in.
Very true. There could be a secondary pedagogical study on perhaps the lessons learned from doing this, right? From using the tool itself, as opposed to the data gathered from the sharing, the primary data. There's also a secondary layer of what kind of cognitive impact does this have on students, both their metacognition of their belief system and the way that it is guiding their sharing of social media narratives, and how reflection or contemplation might affect that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think, hi, this is Mayuraksh. I'm sorry to jump into the conversation.
Oh, please do.
Hi. I have to thank all the panelists for a very engaging session. And I was thinking, when we started making this app, Patty, Claudine, you may remember, the one of the destinations was to measure transformative learning. How through the app, it's actually impacting whoever is using the app, the person, to realize in the end whether there has been some sort of a transformative learning, by just doing what the person did, in this game or app, however we choose to call it. So going back to the, earlier discussion of truth and fact and, what is truth and what is not truth, and are we in a post-truth paradigm, all of that discussion actually takes us back to Stuart Hall, as Matthias was also mentioning, how each of us are actually embedded in a structure of knowledge system, and that informs each of our understanding of anything around us. Terry talked about the social construction of time, which is very, very important in this context, that how are we making meaning of the things that we are experiencing, things that we are seeing around, etc. And Stuart Hall does talk about that, you encode something, you attach a meaning to something, but not necessarily the person who's experiencing will also use the same meaning, and that's called decoding. So how are you extracting that meaning from something that is already encoded? Of course, he uses examples from advertisements, but in case of fake news or truth or post-truth, whatever we choose as a paradigm, I think this is something that we are considering that in the app, that we are trying to understand the players or the person's cultural context. So I think that is something we can explore in our future iterations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. I totally agree. And I know that you've also brought up the importance of intersectionality and trying to understand what are the values or what are the elements that are intersecting within individuals. Is the news that they're most interested in lifestyle, or is it the sports, right, of where there's some crossover, no matter what cluster, what cultural cluster or origin they're coming from? As soon as you have a soccer game up, there seems to be more sharing of whatever that information is related to that particular sports game or a certain player, right? in comparison to what might be, I don't know, a CEO of a large organization, say something that Jack Ma does for Alibaba. That might not be shared as much as a particular player and what's happening within that player's personal life and how it's going to impact their soccer game that next round, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So intersectionality matters, all across, what we're doing in this app. And a person's social location, as we are calling it, what are these axes of differences that are informing a person's experience matters in the person's performance with this app.
And also where they define themselves. And I think this is a challenge when we're trying to understand cultural values. So Alicia is a great example, right? You'd mentioned that you've been in the United States for 25 years and you're originally from Brazil. And Claudine, you recently moved from Brazil to the United States within this last, not even 6 months yet, right? I'm so sorry that COVID comes right after you move to the United States. But anyway, at what point do you still see your place of origin being more U.S.? Would you put here with Brazil and connect with the news media coming through Brazil? I could see where expats, this could be a real challenge. There's an entire group of literature that's about third generation, where individuals have grown up in multiple places that are completely different cultures and how they really have a challenge on where they feel connected. And so this kind of app is really kind of pushing you to have to select something and then identify values that are associated to that particular regional area. And I do wonder, I'm not pro or con, I'm just bringing it up as that's another challenge.
Yeah, I always want to weigh in on that because,
Thank you.
I have feelings. No, so I think that's a really, really important thing. So I think that a lot of times, I'm going to generalize again, a lot of the stuff that I encounter, which is research based on any kind of mapping of the opinions or the attitudes of members of immigrant communities, often takes into consideration two things: the country of origin and the current location, right? Yeah. And so for me, though, I find that very challenging because, I am a Finnish person and I have a very strong Finnish identity. I spent 20 years, as 2/3 of my life, in the UK, and I then got to Australia. So whilst I don't have a strong emotional connection to the UK, and arguably less so now with Brexit, but it's they don't want me anyway, so it's fine. But the point is that if I just get recorded as a Finnish person living in Australia, 2/3 of my immigrant experience are completely lost because I'm forced to categorize myself with the two extremities of my point of origin and current location. So, I think that's a really, really common thing. We see this all the time, but I don't have a solution for that. I'm just voicing hey, here's a problem. I don't bring any answers. I just create further problems. Sorry.
No, I think it's a really important one, especially in this global mobility. Up until COVID, the number of individuals who were studying abroad, they could be abroad for 4 years. In a classroom environment, I think of the number of students coming from India and China, as a matter of fact, in terms of percentages, to the United States, could be here for 4 to 6 to 8 years, getting a education, doing associated work or research related to that, and going back to their country of origin. We have information, studies and research that shows that there's some challenge when they're going back into that country of origin, because they've now also gathered on cultural values from where they had been in the formative years in that development. And so how do you capture those types of things when you're looking at what you're sharing within your social community. When your social media community spreads such a wide range, potentially, of various cultural values.
And
Excellent point.
I mean, I think sometimes it's easier when you see it in someone else, then you can study it better than from your own. It's extracting of your own experience sometimes is hard. And I saw it in my kid, age 3, 4, how he was struggling between the American values, American culture, and the Brazilian culture, going to Brazil every year. And once I started my master, I had a vacation of the whole summer, 3 months. So I brought him there, and he was just learning. I mean, he already speaking Portuguese and could start bringing the words together, mixing, but like struggling socially, like the friends playing with the kids, and then the kids get all mad, and then he go home all sad. Everyone is mad at me, and then 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, everyone was knocking on the door and asking him to go back to play, and he was like, I don't get it. I thought everyone is just not my friend anymore. I mean, in this country for him, that would not happen right away. He could take weeks or days. So seeing him figure it out, all the social rules where he was like 4, 7, 8 years old, it's like a struggle. But I think when you're a kid, you end up getting it faster than when you just arrive like age 25, 28, and then you have to learn how to read people reaction, all that cultural, and then where's the truth? Your truth, the truth of the culture that you are in. So everything blends. So following news, you might start, I'm connected to my country. Then as time goes by, you're like, I have no time. I have to pick which one am I going to be attuned to. So that's a struggle.
It is. It is. My daughter's been living in France for the last 5 years, and I've definitely seen a shift in her mindset on how she sees work, how she views, life and work balance. And it's really been fascinating. She sees less of her shift in the past 5 years. Than what I have seen. So again, it comes back to, where's that perspective? What is the truth? What is the understanding of how you're looking at something and how you might share information around it? And she does a lot of sharing on Facebook. And sometimes I'm like, you're not even living in the United States. Why are you sharing that? All right. I love this visual. I found this visual and I had to adopt it. I think the challenge here comes back to determining what's false and how we figure out a universal understanding of that truth and false issues. All right, let's see how we're going over here. Are there other questions that we'd like to bring up? We have a little bit before we get into our closing.
I saw a trend among a few questions here related to group size, right? How do you analyze a large social or ethnic group? How can you determine how big the ethno-linguistic cluster is or their behavior? How are the groups determined? That seems to be kind of a trend here I'm seeing in the middle column. And I think that kind of goes back to the point you guys were making about how group size can fluctuate depending on what common variable, what common factor you're going to define as being a cultural community. If we were to only use a priori, use everyone's IP address, let's say, and say, well, they're in that spot, so they must be a Russian, or they're in that spot, so they must be a Brazilian, or something like that. Then like Terry had said, you're losing entire chunks of that person's identity, right? That perhaps are migratory or temporary or transient, but nevertheless may have had an impact on their cultural beliefs or experience. And like you had mentioned, Patty, like perhaps because of, like, let's say if the World Cup is happening, and the sharing of information around soccer teams, which can become very aggressive and very tribal when it comes to soccer teams, that can then become the basis for the formation of another community, even one that may be fairly temporary until the end of the cup or something like that. So depending on what time you do the data collection, yeah, in what space, depending on the spatial temporal context of when you take the data, you may have to use post hoc different variables to categorize the communities than you did when you went in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I guess I have a question following that that comment about the kind of post hoc addition of variables. I wonder, would there be like scope for looking at, I have no idea how, determining some other like personal experience or something like that, like, you know what I mean? So what I'm thinking of is a lived experience informs us about the world in which we live in, and positive and negative experiences inform our opinions about what the truth is, right? Like, you only need to have like one really negative experience and you're very like sort of wary of doing that again. Like, you burn yourself once, you're unlikely to stick your hand in the fire kind of thing again. So I wonder then whether like future research, do you see taking this in that sort of space where those idiosyncrasies of particular users would become increasingly important in determining their decisions in what activities, namely sharing, they choose to engage in or not?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. How you would capture whether somebody had an experience associated to that particular content as to why they shared it. And if they had a positive or a negative emotion or attribution to that experience. That's a really great point.
Yeah, I mean, like, for instance, we could, if you were to ask people to recount or even do some sort of pre-structured question around perhaps interactions with the police, and then linking that to content around the Black Lives Matter protests that we've seen, or people's personal experiences perhaps with sexual trauma and their decisions of what to share regarding Me Too content, or linked data around hashtags linked to the Me Too movement, or something along those lines.
Yeah, and then how does that also attribute to privacy issues? So, those are great. Those are really great ones.
Well, yes, with the Me Too movement, it's been a huge issue with privacy. There's just an ocean of defamation lawsuits, that have come out because of people being willing to speak about their experiences anonymously or otherwise. Which kind of actually connects to another question that I've been pondering recently. What role might the judicial system have in defining what's true and what's not, when it comes to people suing over libel, let's say, posted as fake news?
I have absolutely no answer for that, but the more I mull, that kind of made me think of one of these things that we always kind of say as an axiom, which is that, history is written by the winners. And I think that there's always a potential that truth is very much tied to the perspective of whoever is in charge, like whoever is in power. And so having something like a, yeah, I think the sort of, well, yeah, no, that's basically what your question made me think of. It's like these things are not neutral and objective. They are political, they are social, they are about power dynamics. You know, and that's why they are important, but they're not just universally good in any scenario.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, because that's very different on a global basis based on the political focus. Someone had written here about Arab Spring. Predictability of revolutions is a worry phrase for me. Social media was weaponized to track individuals, especially in Arab Spring. So it makes you think there's different political systems that look at situations from a very different perspective. And how can you have some connection on a universal global level?
The last thing we want to do in those time of ours are authoritarian.
Yeah.
Because there's so much out there about anyone, digitally speaking, that if you get someone that just wanted to trace it, is going to get tons for no reason.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's structurally, at least architecturally, in terms of social media and ICT, we've kind of constructed our own panopticon where anyone who, you know, occupies the watchtower, anyone who occupies the data servers already has this data indexed and assembled in a way that can enable surveillance of any kind. All you need is someone with ill intentions and sufficient political power to occupy that architecture. We all kind of collectively built it for them, right? And now someone can waltz right into it if the conditions are politically favorable.
Well, and that's what's scary about AI, right? Because it learns, but it's learning based on the data that's coming through and the structure that's being put in place. So that, you know, this again comes back to how is it being analyzed? How is it developing? How is it storing? How is it building? This particular app, we haven't really looked at the structural pieces of how the data that's going to be brought from the app, how analysis might come and cross over. I mean, I think that's part of the area that we're going to want to kind of think through, so that we don't make assumptions that you know, really should not be made. Well, last couple of minutes, if there's any other questions, thoughts, really appreciate everyone adding in the comments and the feedback and the question. This is so valuable. Really appreciate this. And I say, let's head on over to closing remarks, unless there's someone else that has an addition.
Okay, can I go?
You can go.
Okay, thank you. So we had amazing presentations and wonderful discussions today. We are getting close to the end of this workshop, and now I want to move on to some final thoughts or our closing remarks. To wrap up this conversation, I would like to call back our initial question. What is our impact to humanity through cell phone applications? For the last hours or last 2 hours and a half, we were presented to different topics and researchers and could think about all the complexities and the huge influence that social media and cell phone applications have in our lives. And in this slide, you can find some general ideas that we want to highlight. So starting from the social and cultural perspectives, Dr. Suman talked about cyberbullying and how he's working to identify aggressive tweets. We know that internet access and social media have amplified a lot the problems of bullying, as this digital threat can bring serious emotional, physical effects, psychological effects in the long term. And as the way that I see is that these effects can impact how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to others, and our relations in society. But from the positive side, we can make a good use of cell phones and social media. We are using them a lot. You can use them for positive activities, to connect with friends and family, and for entertainment. But what we have experienced from the use of these apps, that all is these using are changing the way we communicate, the language used in communication, as Dr. Suman mentioned earlier, the multilingual tweets. We can communicate through videos, through images. So all these uses are also changing how we digitally relate to others. It's changing our behaviors, our interests. As Dr. Terry said earlier, have a look at our phone is the first thing that we do when we wake up. So how we use our cell phones in some ways determine things about us and our relations. One thing that caught my attention, another thing that caught my attention was when Dr. Teher mentioned how she's trying to teach students to see themselves as information producers, not only data production. Like this, and this is changing our role from data consumers for data producers. So all these uses are impacting a lot of our lives. But it's not only that. Social media is also impacting politics and changing public administration. According to an infographic published by a North American university, 43% of social media users have decided to learn more about political or social issues after reading a related comment or post on a social media. And this data shows us that social media in some ways have facilitated user engagement on civic and political issues. Social media has also been used as a tool for public administration. Governments have been using them for different types of communication, like emergency alerts, public service announcements, crime preventions. From the business perspective, social media and cell phones are also changing the way business do business. The digital marketing is a great example. Most social browsers use social media to find products, to buy products. So through social media, business can find and communicate with their audience and add credibility to their brand. the increased use of apps can be also an opportunity for more investments in mobile apps. We are facing COVID, and many companies around the world have been forced to create ways to facilitate online shopping. And this is changing, again, the way that we shop, the way that we order food. And so the apps are creating opportunities also for new models of business. The last topic I want to point out here is education. Smartphones introduced another means for knowledge dissemination. The use of WebEx app, as we are doing today, made possible to us to connect people from all over the world. And this is amazing. With a smartphone, people can get educational benefits or educational knowledge when they want, regardless their location. So mobile apps enable like a flexibilization of education. Distance learning that we are very common today, especially with this COVID situation, is changing the traditional way of going to school. As Dr. Brian mentioned, there are a lot of mobile apps that can be used in education to improve students' engagement. He mentioned virtual reality, digital storytelling, and how these tools can help students to express themselves. So apps are important resource for learning. We have a lot of things to advance. As Dr. Brian said, the volume of data is huge and make us question who store all this data. So there are all these complexities. And now, please, next slide. I want to challenge all of you to think or to keep thinking, how can we as researchers, as practitioners or users of these applications influence digital humanities through mobile applications? What we as a group here are trying to do is to advocate to make a positive impact on the development of future applications. And this is our call to action. And here are some key concepts that we should consider. We know that big data provide great opportunities for innovation, but also create some risks to both individuals, society. There is a question of ethical influence that we discussed today that should consider the benefits and risks for all individuals, society as a whole. There is also discussion on how can we guarantee the privacy of our informations. But when we're talking about privacy, ethics, or storage, or establishing big data regulations, there might be different understanding across cultures. So consider cross-cultures values when developing universal protocols for dealing with big data is another aspect to be considered. So there are a lot of complexities involved here, and we see many opportunities for other studies examining different aspects across digital humanities. And we hope, or I hope, that we had finished this workshop with some ideas, insights, or resolutions on how can you support a positive community resilience in digital humanities. So I think that's it. Patty, here are our contact informations, and thank you so much.
Do Mark, but we can't hear you, Pat.
It is muted.
Thank you. Just want to really thank you, Claudine. Wonderful close on pulling this all together. You did a fantastic job. And really appreciate our panelists that have joined us. And Terry, thank you for being part of the discussion this whole time. Really, really love that you have been with us. And I think Dr. Brian might have left, so we'll make sure that we extend our appreciation to he. And Suman, I believe you might still be with us. So really just want to say thank you all. And I don't know if anyone has a closing word. Otherwise, we'll call it a morning, afternoon, evening, middle of the night.
Yeah, Patty. So it's Mayurakshi again.
Yes.
I would absolutely take this opportunity to thank each one of you. It has been a great workshop. And when I approached you to propose a workshop, I knew that it's going to be a great success. But this degree, the scale of success was absolutely not imagined. So I'm very glad that we could use a platform such as this, an interdisciplinary platform such as this, to use as a springboard for the app that we are working on, and also we could pull together, cultural understanding, ideas of big data, ideas of evolving ideas of digital humanities on the same platform. And as you also mentioned, Claudine, you beautifully summarized, the takeaways from the workshop. So I would want to thank each one of you, the organizers, Patty, Alice, Matthias, and Claudine, for staying up, and late into the night. I don't know, Patty, what time is it at your end right now?
3.
But yes, I am so sorry. So, a huge, round of applause for you all. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, you all take care and stay well. Anything
Thank you,
else?
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have
Bye.
care in India. And a good night.
Nice.
Night.
Good day.
Oh, yeah, good day. Thank you.